Okay, so now we are ready to start. Today's issues are no longer confined to a single country, and the Filipino youth can contribute much to the conversations and solutions to global concerns. To kick off today's program, let us explore how the youth are engaging and participating globally in democratic governance. We are fortunate to have with us the founder and CEO of Edukasyon.PH. We have Mr. Henry Motte Muñoz. He is a Filipino-French founder of Edukasyon.PH and the leading edtech platform addressing the education to employment gap for millions of Gen Zs in the Philippines. He was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader and one of Forbes 30 under 30 Asia social entrepreneurs in 2016. Prior to founding Edukasyon.PH, Henry served as a private equity associate at Bain Capital as an investment analyst at Goldman Sachs. He completed his MBA at HBS in 2013 and his economics and economic history at the London School of Economics in 2007. So friends, please all welcome Mr. Henry Muñoz. Henry, go ahead, please.
Hi, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Jules, for the very kind introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and incredibly inspiring. I think having attended a lot of these events and conferences when I was younger and had less white hair, I've always enjoyed, both the people I've met, the things I took away from it, and also, frankly, sometimes just the encouragement that I needed when I was trying to, to stay motivated in terms of working on certain advocacies. Now, we have 10 minutes today, so I'll try to keep this short and sweet. And I want to share with you three things briefly. I think the first one is just why your work matters. I think it's something that often is worth repeating. The second thing is, sharing a little bit what I think you might need along the way in terms of skills or in terms of experience or in terms of attitude. And then finally, just sharing some of my experiences, some of my learnings from some of the things we've done well and many of the things that we haven't done well in the youth focused programs that I've worked on. So the first one is around why your work matters so much. What's so interesting is we always say, oh, the youth matters, their voice matters, the youth is the future, etc. And that's true, but it's even truer in countries with a very young population. And if you think that the median age in the Philippines is around 26, this means that being young is not just an important minority. Being young is the majority. And your voice, so it doesn't just matter out of principle, it matters just for the sheer size of your community. So that's the first one. You have critical mass, and that's something you should always, always remember. Very often when people think of leadership, they think of pretty old leaders. The Philippines actually suffers from having a very old age in politics and in business, but never forget that the youth is the majority of this country's population. The second one is you're very connected. If you think of what this country was able to achieve in terms of, fighting for the first ever Asian Republic in the late 19th century, of the people power movements in the 80s and even in the 2000s, this was all done pre-mobile phones, pre-internet. Think of just how much more connected you are today. Obviously, there's a lot of issues with fake news and disinformation, but the tool for connecting to other young people who want a better future matters. And thirdly, you have a very clear purpose. It's impossible to not understand just how many issues the Philippines faces today. All the information is available out there, whether you're looking at TV, social media. There's a lot of documentation, and so you have a clear purpose. There's SDGs that we can all work towards. Everything from fighting for democracy to fighting against climate change. So your purpose is incredibly important and it's incredibly visible, and this is why your work matters. The second thing is around what you need, and I think there's a lot of things that you're going to need. So unfortunately, that's what I'm going to share is only the tip of the iceberg. But three things that I found were very important. The first one is you need to have grit. One of the things that I learned when I was trying to set up, programs was hearing from my aunt and uncle who had been, working in civil society for about 40 or 50 years. And I remember asking them, like, don't you get tired? don't you sometimes get tired of still fighting for democracy in your 60s or 70s when you were already fighting for it in your teenage years? And the advice they gave me was, problems are complex. Nationwide problems are even more complex, and you will need to think with a very long time perspective. Some problems can be solved in months or years. Some problems will take decades. And in an age where we're used to instant gratification, just remember that meaningful structural societal change takes time. The second thing you need is empathy. You are very passionate about your cause, and that's fantastic. You must accept that most people will not be passionate about your cause. It's just a fact of life. At best, people tend to be passionate about one or two causes. The average person is actually usually not that passionate about anything. They just want to get on with their life. And you cannot take it against people that they are busy enough with other things that they're interested in. But you need to have that empathy and that understanding that not everyone will be as passionate about this problem the way you are. The third one is maintain your integrity no matter what. It's tempting when a problem seems so big to fix, and there's always going to be certain individuals, organizations that might, offer help, support. Always maintain your moral compass and always ask yourself, is this something I would be proud of? Is this something that's really additive to the movement in terms of, keeping a moral compass? Because if it isn't, it will bite you in the ass in the future. And just always remind yourself, would I be comfortable if this partnership was featured on a front of the newspaper? Finally, quickly, some experience. When we set up with some friends, Bantay.PH was an anti-corruption NGO. We learned three things, I would say. The first one is just how much apathy there was, and we were very frustrated. And there were not enough people were caring about corruption. And I remember being very frustrated and angry until I realized that, again, you have to understand that not everyone will be as interested as you. And so instead of getting upset that most people weren't interested, I focused on the people who were interested. And you can affect a lot of change through an empowered small minority. The second thing was, don't be afraid of learning from abroad. Not all solutions have to be homegrown. Bantay.PH was really, its existence was founded on an idea that was done in India. And we were even pitching it as like, hey, we're gonna repeat what was done in India and we want to do it in the Philippines. Thirdly, systems always beat enthusiasm. Anything you can make systemic, anything that you can ingrain in institutions and processes will outlive any enthusiasm. And then when it comes to Edukasyon, three things that we've learned. The first one is around perseverance. This ties to the grit that I said you need to have. We're 6 years into our journey, and in a way, yes, we reach millions of students and that feels nice, but we're still very, very far from what we want to achieve in terms of youth empowerment and youth education. The second thing is basic information goes a very long way. The most popular pages on Edukasyon.PH are the ones with the most basic information about literally what is senior high school, what is college, how to pick a major. And so never underestimate the power of quality, factual, truthful, basic information in helping individuals make better decisions in their lives. And finally, accept that it's a very crowded digital landscape out there. You're passionate about democracy and about governance, and that's fantastic. You are competing with really fun TikTok challenges, with endless loops of YouTube videos, with really funny memes to share on Instagram and Facebook. You have to accept it, and so you have to make content that is able to carve out its own space against this very crowded landscape. And that's it for me. I wanted to share a little bit of this, and to conclude, it's amazing to see all of you here. You guys are spending weekend time on something that you care about. This tells me everything I need to know about the future of our country being in the safe hands of an inspired and energetic and optimistic youth. Just don't forget to have grit, empathy, and integrity in everything that you do. And thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Henry, for that very inspiring message to all our participants right now. I'd like to ask a few questions. You mentioned about never underestimating factual basic information. So at the moment, we all know that social media, unfortunately, sometimes is being used to divide people, or it is basically weaponized right now. So how is it possible currently for us to use social media forwarding factual basic information amid the vast disinformation?
Yes. So there's two things. There's offense and defense. Offense is about pushing out correct factual information. And this can be, there's trusted sources, and I'm sure a lot of the initiative of Youth-Led, and, I love, your work and what, Emil and Ching and the broader Asia Foundation have been doing. So share the quality factual information, but also do not be afraid of reporting disinformation. The people who work at Facebook and Google Philippines are good citizens who don't feel great about this information. Find them on LinkedIn, find them on Facebook, message them, use the official channels for Facebook, Instagram, YouTube to report content that violates the policies. And don't be, if you have to play both hands. The thing is, the people who are spreading false information are not amateurs. So these guys are very well funded, they're very well run, and they've understood what they can try to get away with. Do not be afraid of taking the social media platforms to account. They have a responsibility, and whether or not it's enshrined in the law doesn't matter. These guys are desperate for societal approval. If you put enough pressure, they will start removing the false content, but they'll only do it if they get pressure. And unfortunately, that's the way the world works. You have to put pressure on these for-profit tech giants, because otherwise they will not, out of their own volition, remove all this harmful content. We've seen it over and over again. It's sad, but it is what it is. And you have to make sure that you fight on both fronts.
Henry, you mentioned about TikTok, Facebook, and other social media giants right now. To our viewers who are, all of us basically are content creators, right? Because the moment you post a simple status or a video, that's content already in the internet. So do you have, can you enumerate some tips for our content creator youth members to create responsible content, especially in countering disinformation?
Sure. So bear in mind, I get very few likes when I post, so I'm not a great I'm not a great resource speaker on creating content that goes viral or goes far. I think, again, go back to your moral compass and make sure that what you do is you're stating facts, not opinions. So if you feel very strong about a certain candidate, what are you saying? Are you, are you going to just write disparaging things about them, or are you going to talk about track records? Instead of saying so-and-so is the son of this and that, why don't you talk instead about, hey, what is the track record in terms of what has this person done to serve the nation? And so that's how you can try to shift the debate. Whatever you do, don't get clickbaited into traps to make it about personality. But that's a very personal opinion. I think if this goes against what was taught in the last 2 days, ignore what I just said.
Thanks, Henry. Okay, on a last note, definitely education is one of the most relatable concerns for our youth sector right now, education, and it's part of the sustainable development goals as we gear towards 2030. But the main battle cry when we're talking about the SDGs is to make sure that no one is left behind. So as we lead towards 2030, the deadline of the SDGs, how can we make sure that no one is left behind, especially now that we are using technology? And the reality is not everyone has access to this platform.
Yeah. So ironically, I mean, look, I firmly believe in what the private sector can do, right? Like Edukasyon is a for-profit, private edtech company. We work with private schools, with private publishers. So obviously, I'm a big believer in what the private sector can do. I'm a big believer as well in what the civil society sector can do. That's why I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. But you have to remember that a third of national budget in the Philippines goes to education. And that's fantastic. And the best thing you can do to ensure no child is left behind is to elect leaders that have actual clear policies on how to make this a reality, right? I mean, every person who runs for office will always be pro-infrastructure, pro-education, pro-poor, anti-corruption, blah, blah, blah. actually look at their platforms and say, okay, great, you want kids to do well, that's fantastic. You want my vote, you want the votes of my constituency. What's your policy, right? And if they say something super vague, like, we're going to build more classrooms and we're going to just say, but no, but like, how are you going to spend the budget? DepEd has a third of national budget. How are you spending it? How are you going to fund CHED? How are you going to fund TESTA? Are you going to involve the ICT, in terms of giving every student a tablet? What are you going to do with the telcos? Are you going to force them to give free internet to like poorer students, or are you going to subsidize it? And so really push all the candidates on what their policies are, because frankly, mayors, governors, congressmen, senators, president, vice president, all have some bearing on how the education money gets spent. Most people don't realize, but all LGUs have, I think, something called the Special Education Fund, which means that like even small cities within Metro Manila have budgets of hundreds of millions of pesos every year, completely discretionary, for the LGU to spend on education projects. So there is money. You need to find the leaders who have a clear plan on how to spend that money. That would be my number one advice.
Thanks, Henry. So that's a very important tip to all our voters for 2022, to make sure that we vote based on issues and not just on personality. We should dig down into their platforms and their plans. So Henry, allow us to read some of the comments and questions from our viewers here on Zoom. So there's a question from Sean. He is from RMMC General Santos. So the question is, during this pandemic, how could we encourage the youth to participate in both educational and societal activities, considering that some of us are losing our interest?
Sure. So that's a very fair one. And there's no silver bullet. I think everyone's getting a mix of like lockdown and cabin fever, and that is probably going to get worse with, with the elections coming up in a way. I think dig deep into the why. Often, there's often a very, very personal story. And, if I was just interested in education per se, I would have given up at some point in the last 6 years. Because trust me, there's hard days, hard weeks, hard months where just nothing going right. And there's no external stimuli that's like positively encouraging you to be active. The story that I keep hanging on to is that my grandfather came from a family of subsistence farmers, and he had to finish high school at 14 and couldn't afford to finish high school beyond that age. And so he always drilled into my parents, like my mom and her siblings, ethos that, education is the one gift that no one can take away from you. It is a life-changing gift, and that is what everyone should get. And so every time I'm having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, I just go back to that story, and I do this in memory of someone that I've never met, by the way. He passed away years before I was born. And so that's my very personal story. And all of you will have something similar, right? It could be, you might be interested in good governance because there's a corruption scandal that happened in your barangay, in your province, in the country, and it just hit a raw nerve where you're like, people died because someone stole money, and that's just not right. Hang on to that emotion. You shouldn't act emotionally when you're doing activism. It's very important to be level-headed and factual, but it's very healthy to have some emotional drive. It's not just good. Don't just be motivated by your brain, be motivated by your heart.
Thanks, Henry. There's a last question from Michael from Caraga. The message is, good day, Henry. Regarding your idea that we should focus on the empowered minority of engaged youth, how do we eventually break out of this bubble? How can we expand our movements and advocacy so that we could ignite the passions of the rest of Filipino youth, especially ones who are unengaged?
Yes. So this is where you almost have to put on your hat as a company. Imagine you're basically trying to sell a new product, and all these people have been living without the product just fine, but you're trying to create, you're launching a soft drink, you're launching a burger chain, you're launching a new fashion brand. How are you convincing people to want what you have to offer when they've lived just fine without it their whole lives? And it's a little bit the same with advocacy work, right? People who haven't been passionate about elections, how do you get them, right? And so I can share with you a very personal thing. this is the first time I'm actually registered for Philippines election. And I'm both very excited, but I'm also very ashamed that I never voted before, even though I've been a citizen for a very long time. But I actually used it when I was trying to convince other friends who were not, registered voters, because, they were like, oh, like nothing ever changes. And I basically went for the empathy. I was like, you know what? I get it. And I can tell you that like I actually had never registered to vote, but I've registered to vote this time, and this is why. And I just shared my personal reasons. And so showing that, you don't have to have been born with a passion for this to get involved. Basically, it's never too late is message number one. The second thing you have to do is you have to make it easy for them. I'm laughing because I basically had to literally explain to a bunch of friends of mine who are much smarter and much more educated than I am how to get registered to vote. And I basically became like a mini DFA around like, this is your consulate in Madrid and this is how you register in San Francisco. But you basically have to break it down and make it very, very easy for people to get engaged. And then the third thing is you have to relate it to their problem. Like they must have a pain point. And, if the issue, for example, is like people, not thinking enough about who they vote for, you first need to have a conversation with them about like, oh, so who's your mayor? Did you vote for him last time? Like, are you happy with what he's done? And, you might hear a lot of like, oh, politicians are all the same. And then try to go for someone who's like university loved in the Philippines, right? Like Mayor Vico Soto in Pasig, like most people like are are like loving him. Obviously they can't vote for him if they're not based in Pasig, but just be like, oh, like there's other good politicians out there. I wonder if there's something similar, for our Congress seat, for our barangay captain, et cetera, but always bring it back to them, not to your own ideal, because otherwise, if you're just trying to shove your advocacy, people are just going to throw up and just, move away from you. Like nobody wants to be force-fed an advocacy.
Thanks, Henry. There's another question. I'm sorry. This is
No.
from, that's fine. Okay. Here's a question from Mark. What are the factors why the education sector in the Philippines are not prioritized by the government? And why are we left behind by our neighbors?
So that's actually interesting because I would slightly push back. I wouldn't say that education in the Philippines is not prioritized. The amount of budget that we spend on it just tells you what you need to know. Like the Philippine government is spending a lot on education, and there was an increase in spending under the last administration, and there's been an increase in spending under this administration as well. So regardless of who you want to vote for, I can tell you that in the last 1 or 2 decades, there's been more money spent on education than before. Health is actually an issue, a much bigger issue in terms of underspending. I think the issue in the Philippines is more that one, we're playing catch up. So a lot of our spending has been to do something as basic as building schools, or just paying teachers, paying the existing teachers like a more realistic salary. And so that can absorb a lot of budget, but not change it that much, the whole state of the education system. I think the second issue has been that we've done good things like building classrooms, paying teachers more, doing K-12, giving scholarship assistance for college, but we haven't attacked the root of the problem, which is an outdated curriculum and an outdated teaching methodology.
Thanks, Henry. Yeah,
that's the reform we need to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd like to add something about that. To be fair, among all agencies in the Philippines, the Department of Education gets the lion's share of the budget among all departments. However, the usual criticism is there's also a huge amount allocated for debt servicing, for military spending, among others. But if we're talking about in the context of departments, DepEd usually gets the lion's share. So anyway, there's another question, Henry. If you are to make an additional subject or to add an additional subject and prioritize other courses, etc., on the curriculum of basic and higher education in the Philippines, what would it be?
So I have 3 answers. Sorry, it's not one. Financial literacy, civic education, sex education. And by the way, these are 3 things that we're doing on Edukasyon.PH. So if you're actually interested in becoming more financially literate, getting proper sex ed, and getting civic education, even though I think as youth leaders, you probably don't need it as much, it's on our website.
I certainly
and it's something that should be accessible to every Filipino.
Yeah, Henry, I certainly agree with, especially with financial literacy. Because in my end, I'm 30 years old right now. I think I only learned how to save when I was 24. So yeah, that's very important for us to learn on how to really save. So yeah, I guess we're done with the questions. So thank you so much, Henry Muñoz of Edukasyon.PH, for inspiring all of us this afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much. So indeed, the youth and youth movements have been instrumental in bringing change to our society. So until today, Filipino youth movements continue to brave the front lines, championing their advocacies in various spaces in their communities. So thank you so much once again. Let's give Henry a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much. I hope you all took down notes, and hopefully we could implement those tips in our daily lives and in your communities as well. So